Hello and welcome back to the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. Due to his win in the previous round, Lasker heads into round number 3 of the Amsterdam 1889 tournament in clear first place. However, that could all change, as in this round he must have the black pieces against one of the gentlemen in the chasing pack, Rudolf Loman. Now, Loman has been competing in the Dutch Championships ever since 1881, and in fact, he won the 1888 edition over Arnold van Foreest and his older brother Dirk. So, for being specific, Loman is the reigning Dutch champion. He has also played in multiple tournaments outside of the Netherlands, including in England and Germany. For example, here's his attempt at the 1883 Hauptturnier of the German Chess Federation Congress. He was unsuccessful, but when you're in a group with Siegbert Tarrasch, even back then, there's only so much you can do. So this guy is definitely much more experienced than Lasker, and it will be a very good test for our subject as we take a look at his first black game in this international tournament. Let's see what happened. With white, Rudolf Loman opens with e4. Lasker responds e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5, a6, bishop to a4, knight to f6, and castles. Straightforward so far. Here Lasker gives us our second look at the double deferred Steinitz defense by playing the move d6. Now the tournament book here believes that the best move for white is d3. This is what we saw when Victor Tietz played this opening in the second video of the saga. I'll leave a link to that down in the description. Loman instead decides to play knight to c3. Fair enough. Lasker responds with b5. We have bishop back to b3, and now the most direct move, bishop to g4. Now the tournament book points out that white has a very nice resource if he immediately plays the moves that we'll see in a minute, d3 and knight to d4. This is what Lasker is intending. They believe that white's best move here is to play bishop to e3, and that after knight captures on f3 with check, g captures on f3 comes with a tempo on the bishop, and after it moves to h3, rook to e1 leaves white with a reasonably nice position. Now it's interesting, it suggests a somewhat exotic plan for black, starting with the move g5. Makes somewhat sense because this king over here is a little bit exposed. And after king to h1, they finish with rook to g8. In the context, this game, this move isn't going to be too far-fetched, but it's definitely interesting to see it. Anyway, Loman decides to kick the bishop first by playing h3. The bishop slides back to h5, and only now d3 is played. Now, as mentioned, knight to d4 was played in this particular game. I feel it worth mentioning that there exists a 1905 game, where Lasker instead played the move queen to d7, and after white played bishop to e3, again, the move g5 came on the board. It's certainly an interesting pattern. But okay, knight to d4 was played here by Lasker. Now the point here is that white somewhat loses that previous resource of bishop to e3, because this no longer comes with as much sting. After knight captures f3, g captures f3 not coming with tempo on the bishop, means that black can just develop. For example, bishop to e7. I think white's best bet is to play king to g2. You got to defend these weak pawns somehow. But after castles, I think black has to be for choice here. What white does have access to in this position is a very powerful shot in the move g4, and this is going to come up again. This move in this particular position has apparently been played once in an under 10 tournament from 2023. In that game, black immediately went wrong with knight captures on g4, which simply lost a piece to knight captures on d4, so there's not really too much to analyze there. But in this particular position, Loman instead decided to play the move king to h2. This move is a novelty, and so it's as of move 10 that the players are playing a unique game. Now this move isn't necessarily a blunder, though I will ask you to remember it shortly, as this move will come up again after the few following moves. So following this novelty, what does Lasker play? He goes for the move that we've been telegraphing a couple of times now, g5. Has a pawn ever been offered so energetically? Now, of course, we have to ask the question, what happens if you take it? Well, following bishop captures on g5 and rook to g8, the tournament book examines 3 moves here from white. Bishop to h4 is refuted well enough. They play rook captures on g2 with check, king captures g2, and now bishop captures on f3 with check. This forces white to give up the queen, queen captures f3, knight captures f3, king captures on f3, and they finish by playing the precise move c6, taking away the d5 square from some of white's minor pieces. Black has a slight material lead here with the queen in exchange for the rook and the light squared bishop, and they should have somewhat of an edge here. The move bishop captures on f6 is not refuted as well. Queen captures on f6 would refute it well enough. The point is that white doesn't have access to any moves like knight to d5 because, again, rook captures on g2 comes and this f3 knight is critically underdefended. They instead opt to play the move knight captures on f3. Now, because they play the move queen captures on f3 here, this does end up working for black. What they needed to see is that after g captures f3 and queen captures on f6, there's a very particular path that white has to follow in order to have a tenable position. They have to start with rook to g1, and after rook captures on g1, only now knight to d5. And the most concrete line for black to continue would be after rook captures on d1, knight captures on f6 with check, king to e7, knight to d5 with check, and after the king moves back, here rook captures on d1. White emerges a pawn up, but it's a doubled f-pawn. These pawns are backwards. I don't see white keeping this material advantage for long, and this endgame should be more or less equal. The problem, of course, is that queen captures on f3 doesn't work. Bishop captures f3, bishop captures on d8, and now rook captures on g2 with check, king to h1, rook captures d8, and after knight to d5 and bishop to h6, this is where they end their analysis, but white is just getting crushed here. This king is not long for this world. So that brings us to the best move that white has at their disposal, which is again g4. Now here they give the best moves for black. Bishop captures on g4. You have to play with maximum aggression here. After h captures g4, knight captures on g4 with check. Now if you play king to h3 here as white, you're going to be running into a couple of awkward skewers, starting with queen to d7, and if you move the king up to h4, bishop to e7, and again, the white king is going to get in a lot of danger. So they offer the best move here, which is king to g3, and now the line they give for black starts with knight to h6, which is certainly interesting. Rook to g1, knight captures f3, queen captures f3, and rook captures on g5 with check. They play king to h3, and after queen to d7 with check and king to h4, they end the line with rook to g6, and they say black claims one more pawn with good play. Now I admit, I stared at this position for a little bit, thinking of how white doesn't just lose. They're down a pawn and their king is out in the open, and I suppose that white can survive after trading here on g6, f captures g6, and now knight to d5. This threat here on f6 is very annoying if you don't castle here as black, and now white can start getting the king out of danger with king to g3. I suppose that because black isn't getting immediately checkmated, and neither of these minor pieces for black are super attractive, there is certainly compensation for the pawn, though I don't think that white is going to be necessarily all that happy with this position. So I think that all in all, we have demonstrated more or less why white doesn't necessarily benefit too much from taking this pawn. Fortunately for Loman, he doesn't take it, and he instead plays once again the most powerful move in the position, g4. Now when the pawn was back on g7, the best line for black was to start with knight captures on b3, and after a captures b3, you could simply move this bishop back to g6, and black was solid enough. But of course now white can simply take this pawn, and with there being no threats along the g-file, there's nothing for white to worry about. They're simply up a pawn for nothing. So Lasker decides to play this position with the maximum amount of energy. Knight captures on g4 with check. After h captures on g4 and bishop captures on g4, it's pretty easy to see what he's going for. This knight is under a crazy amount of pressure, and it's not too hard to imagine black simply improving the pressure with something like queen to d6 or queen to f6, excuse me, and winning material. However, unfortunately for Lasker, Loman has a move here which completely kills any chance of this sacrifice doing anything reasonable. So, what I want you to do, pause the video, see if you can find the move that Loman has at his disposal here to really make Lasker look like he has egg on his face. And as a hint, study the classics. All right, 3, 2, 1. When I say classics, I'm talking about the 1700s classics. Knight captures on e5. Now, of course, this comes with a double attack on the bishop. If you take, we get Legal's mate. Bishop captures f7, king to e7, and now bishop captures on g5 was also checkmate, but of course you're going to play the more stylistic move, knight to d5. We have Legal's mate on the board, and that's game. Now, unfortunately for Loman, he did not study his classics. He did not find knight captures on e5, and he instead started with bishop captures on f7 with check. And okay, after king captures on f7, knight captures on e5 is still a reasonable move to play here. On d captures e5, queen captures g4 at least keeps the material equal, though I think that white is going to be slightly worse here because their king is going to be getting attacked first, starting with h5. However, again, Loman did not find knight captures on e5. He instead miscalculated and played knight captures on g5 with check. Now this move is a mistake, and it is precisely due to the move that I asked you to remember earlier, king to h2. Remember when I told you to keep this in mind a whole 4 moves ago? It's been a long game, even though it has not been a long game. The point being, after queen captures on g5, bishop captures on g5, and bishop captures on d1, this piece cannot be recovered, as after rook captures on d1, there is a fork on f3. Black picks up the bishop and wins the game. So Loman realizes this, he plays the move f4 defending his bishop, but Lasker simply escapes with his own bishop back to g4. He has an extra piece, and it's game over. And can you believe it's only move 16? It's been a game. Now, of course, Loman still has to try something. F captures on e5 with check. Okay, he's got to start going on the attack. After king to g6, he tries bishop to f6. Lasker simply blocks with bishop to g7, and now rook to f4, going after the bishop. Lasker calmly defends it with h5, and after rook a to f1, this is certainly an active developing move, but it doesn't come with any concrete threats, so Lasker is able to play rook a to f8. And after knight to d5, finally Loman's attack is over, and Lasker is able to comfortably consolidate. He plays d captures on e5, hitting the rook, and after the rook slides down to f2, Lasker played bishop captures on f6, and it was here on move 22 that Rudolf Loman simply resigned the game. There's no way for him to stop more material from coming off the board. If you take with the rook, then black is certainly happy to trade rooks here, and the black king is definitely not going to get checkmated in this endgame. While if you try to be somewhat clever about it and play knight captures on f6, hoping to mitigate the amount of trades, black has another clever move in response, knight to f3. You cut off the rook's defense of the knight, you force a bunch of exchanges here on f3, and then black is still able to take here on f6. This is a rook endgame that is certainly not drawn, I promise you. So yeah, relatively short game, but certainly had its fair share of fireworks. I would like to believe that these moves here, starting at move 13 with bishop captures on f7, were played under some time pressure. The time control for this tournament was 18 moves per hour, and given that I imagine there was a lot of calculation that had to be done after Lasker played this move g5, it wouldn't surprise me if Loman was very low on time and was really blitzing out some of these moves at the end here and just simply missed that he was unable to deal with this fork coming on f3 at the end. But that's the game. With that, Lasker goes to a perfect 3 out of 3 start. He increases his lead, and he has a very commanding first place as we enter round number 4 of the Amsterdam 1889 tournament. So there's lots more chess to look forward to, and I look forward to seeing you there. Until next time.